Judge mocks black young couple in court, shocked when they reveal elite U.S. Army training. The room was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that came just before something exploded. The air inside courtroom 4B felt heavy, like everyone in the room could feel something wasn't right. The judge sat up high, robe crisp, face cold. His name was Judge Calloway. For over 2 decades, he ran his courtroom like a stage, always in control, always the star. But today, something was different. His eyes were locked on a young black couple sitting at the defense table, and the smirk on his face wasn't just about power, it was personal. "This should be quick," he said under his breath, loud enough for the court reporter to hear. Darius Blackwood sat tall, back straight like a soldier, because he was one. His wife Aaliyah sat beside him, calm, composed, every movement controlled. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, catching the small glances, the whispering journalists, the man in the expensive gray suit watching from the front row. That man was Gregory Langston, wealthy, connected, dangerous. He was the one pointing fingers at Darius and Aaliyah, accusing them of attacking him and stealing from his car during a charity gala. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," the judge called out, pretending to read from their case file, though it was clear he already had his story ready. Former military. Now, apparently out of control. He said it like a joke. Some in the courtroom even chuckled. But Aaliyah didn't blink. Darius didn't move. Their stillness wasn't fear. It was focus. The prosecutor stepped forward, young, eager to impress. "Your Honor, we have a witness," he said proudly. "Mr. Langston, philanthropist and business leader, who has served this community for years." Langston stood slowly, every part of him rehearsed. His words were smooth, his tone soft. "I only wanted to help veterans. I never expected to be attacked by 2 of them." He let the sentence hang in the air. Some jurors looked confused, others looked convinced, but Aaliyah just leaned forward, folded her hands and said quietly, "Interesting." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, Mrs. Blackwood?" "I was just wondering," she replied, her voice calm, steady. "If we're so dangerous, why are you sweating?" Silence. One of the jurors shifted in their seat. A woman in the back stopped typing. Judge Calloway gripped his gavel tightly. "That's enough." But the moment was already gone. The crack had appeared. The mask had slipped. Everyone saw it. Langston looked at the judge, and the judge gave him a tiny nod, too small for most to notice. But Aaliyah noticed, and she smiled, just a little. Because this wasn't just a trial. It was a trap. But not for them. They weren't here to defend themselves. They were here to expose something far bigger than one man's lie. And the people in that courtroom were about to find out what happens when the wrong people get accused, especially when those people were trained to uncover lies, dismantle systems, and fight without ever being seen. Because Darius and Aaliyah didn't come for justice. They came for the whole truth. And they had just gotten started. 3 nights before the courtroom turned into a battlefield, the chandeliers at the Crestmont Hotel sparkled like stars. It was a high society event, the kind where champagne flowed easily and fake smiles were served right alongside expensive hors d'oeuvres. The charity gala was all about honoring military service, but the only uniforms in the room were worn by waitstaff. Darius and Aaliyah stood near the back. They didn't come for the drinks or the praise. Their old commanding officer had invited them, hoping they could meet donors who might support a veterans' mental health program they were helping launch. Darius wore a clean-cut charcoal suit. Aaliyah had a sleek black dress that spoke quiet, confidence. But they didn't blend in, and they weren't trying to. They were observers, trained to notice patterns, voices, shifts in the room. And that's exactly what happened near the Marble Bar. They overheard him before they saw him. "Defense contracts are just the start," a voice said, rich and casual. "Once we expand overseas, the numbers will triple. Nobody's watching. They never are." They turned slightly. Gregory Langston, talking a little too loud, thanks to the glass of scotch in his hand. A small group of government officials hung on his every word, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. A general, retired by the looks of his uniform, moved in fast. "Greg," he said under his breath, "not here. Too many ears." Langston waved him off like a fly. Darius glanced at Aaliyah. Just a half-second look. That was enough. No words needed. They knew what they'd heard. And more importantly, what it meant. The rest of the night moved in slow motion. Darius didn't touch his drink. Aaliyah kept her smile polite, but her mind was racing. They didn't need to follow Langston. They already knew how this worked. He was making deals that could endanger soldiers, maybe worse. On their way out of the hotel, they cut through the underground parking lot. That's when they saw her. A young woman in a burgundy dress was standing next to a silver car, crying. Her mascara had run down her face, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her phone. "Are you okay?" Aaliyah asked gently, her voice switching to that calm, steady tone she used during her PSYOPs missions. The girl looked up. He said I was trying to steal. "I wasn't. I just wanted my... Get away from my car!" Langston's voice exploded behind them. They turned to see him charging toward them. Gone was the smooth, smiling man from earlier. His face was twisted with rage. "Call the police," he barked, already dialing. "These two were tampering with my vehicle. They assaulted my guest." Darius didn't say a word. He didn't flinch. Aaliyah stepped in front of the girl. Within minutes, squad cars arrived. Too fast, almost like they were waiting nearby. "We're just here to talk," one officer said, hand already on his holster. Langston put on his philanthropist voice again. "I'm terribly sorry to involve you like this," he told the officers, "but I can't let this go unreported." The officers separated Darius and Aaliyah. No Miranda rights, no chance to explain. They were just taken. Later, in the back seat of a police cruiser, Aaliyah looked out the window, her expression unreadable. Darius spoke first. "They think we stumbled onto something." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "We didn't stumble. We were meant to hear it." "Yeah," he said quietly, "but they don't know who we are." Because what Langston and Judge Calloway didn't realize, what no one in that courthouse knew, was that the Blackwoods had spent years uncovering enemy plots overseas, gathering intelligence without leaving fingerprints, infiltrating systems that were supposed to be airtight, and now they were back home. This time, the battlefield wore suits, and the enemy spoke perfect English, hosted charity galas, and pretended to care about veterans. Back in court, Langston sat with a smug smile on his face as the prosecution laid out their version of the story. Tampering with vehicles, attempted, assault, theft, national security risk. It was clean, polished, manufactured. But Aaliyah knew that the truth doesn't always show up in perfect lines. Sometimes it leaks, sometimes it bleeds. She looked over at Darius. He hadn't moved since they entered court. Still, calm, but his eyes locked briefly with hers. 1 second. That's all they needed. Everything was going exactly to plan. Because if the system wanted a fight, they were ready for war. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. It was late afternoon now, but no one moved. No one even yawned. Something had shifted in the air. You could feel it. The prosecution had just finished presenting another piece of so-called evidence, a shaky video showing Darius and Aaliyah standing near Langston's car. The footage was grainy, time-stamped just minutes before the police arrived. It looked suspicious, sure. But it also looked wrong, because Darius wasn't moving aggressively. He was standing next to a crying girl. Aaliyah had her hands out, not in anger, but in comfort. Still, Judge Calloway leaned forward in his chair and gave a loud, satisfied sigh. "Crystal clear," he said. "Just look at them. Reckless, arrogant, disrespectful." He turned to the jury as if his words were law. But this time, no one nodded. They were watching Aaliyah. She wasn't reacting. She just calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a pen and began writing. Not notes, coordinates. She was tracking reactions, watching who leaned forward when Langston spoke, who avoided eye contact when Judge Calloway made a jab. Every twitch, every whisper, every subtle cue. It was all part of the pattern. And patterns? She was trained to read them like a map. At the table beside her, Rachel Vance, their attorney, whispered, "They're blocking everything we submit. The hard drives, the surveillance photos, the witness list, it's all being shut down." Darius didn't even look up. "Let them." Rachel blinked. "Let them?" "Every time they block something," Aaliyah said softly, "they create a new weakness." Rachel didn't respond, but she looked at them differently after that. She had taken hard cases before, but she'd never seen two defendants this calm, this focused. It didn't feel like she was protecting them. It felt like she was following their lead. The judge called for a short recess. People started rising slowly from the benches, whispers now buzzing through the gallery. The couple stood too, just like everyone else. But their movements weren't rushed. They never were. As they exited the courtroom, a man in a navy blue suit brushed past them and handed Darius a folded napkin. No eye contact, no words. They didn't open it until they were in the hallway. Inside, one sentence, "You're being watched, and not just by the jury." Aaliyah smiled faintly. They knew that already. Back in the judge's chambers, Calloway was pacing. Not calmly, not confidently. He was sweating again. "What do they know?" he asked. Langston stood near the window, watching the reporters set up outside. "Too much," he said. "But not enough to prove anything. Unless someone slips." The judge nodded, then looked at Langston. "Then no one slips." But out in the hallway, someone already had. Because while the courtroom was on break, Aaliyah casually dropped a flash drive into the hands of a court clerk. One she knew had a brother in the media. "Watch it," she said. "Then decide who you work for." She didn't wait for a response. Back inside, the judge struck the gavel again and the courtroom settled. "Let's proceed." Rachel stood, determined to enter one more piece of real evidence. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to call an expert witness who reviewed the video footage and found it had been denied," Judge Calloway interrupted. "Respectfully, sir." "I said denied." His voice cracked this time, and just like that, the courtroom saw it. He wasn't confident. He was scared. The jury felt it too. A few jurors leaned toward each other. Even the court reporter paused, unsure whether to type what she had just witnessed. Langston shifted in his seat. He felt it unraveling. This wasn't going to be the open and shut case he had paid for. Back at the defense table, Aaliyah leaned in and whispered something to Darius. No one else heard it, but whatever she said made him smile for the first time all day. Because all the planning, all the gathering, all the waiting, it was working. This trial wasn't going to be their downfall. Was the first act in their counterattack. From the outside, everything still looked polished. Langston was still in his $1,000 suit. Judge Calloway still wore his black robe like armor. The prosecution still stood tall, confident, reading their script like it was gospel. But inside the room, everything was starting to slip. It started small, just little things. One of the jurors, an older woman in the front row, kept fidgeting with her pen. Another, a younger man, stopped taking notes altogether and just stared at the judge. It wasn't defiance. It was something else. Suspicion. Rachel, the defense attorney, noticed too. Her job was supposed to be reacting, objecting, clarifying, pushing back. But now, she was watching. Carefully. Because the jury wasn't just listening anymore. They were waking up. Aaliyah, still calm as ever, slowly leaned over to whisper to Rachel. "Next time they mention the footage," she said softly, "ask about the timestamp." Rachel blinked. "Why?" "Because it was changed." Rachel's breath caught, but she nodded. That little clue gave her a thread, and she knew how to pull on threads. The prosecution called another witness, this time a private security officer who claimed he saw Darius near Langston's vehicle that night. "I saw him reaching into the car," the guard said confidently. "He looked aggressive." Rachel stood up slowly. "And how far were you from Mr. Blackwood when this happened?" "About maybe 40, 50 feet. "Was it dark?" "There were lights in the parking garage," he replied quickly. She paused. "Were there any obstructions? Other cars? People?" The man hesitated. I guess. I didn't really notice." Rachel nodded. "And what hand was Mr. Blackwood using to reach into the car?" "That did it." The guard blinked. I think his right?" Rachel turned. "Mr. Blackwood, are you right-handed?" Darius stood up slowly and raised his left hand. "No, ma'am. I'm left-handed. Have been all my life." The courtroom fell into silence. It wasn't a loud moment, but it was loud enough. The judge shifted in his chair, clearly irritated. "Let's keep the focus on the facts," he snapped. "Exactly," Rachel said calmly, sitting down. "Let's." But the cracks were forming, and Aaliyah wasn't done yet. That night, after court adjourned, someone slid a note under Rachel's car windshield. It was handwritten, no name, just 4 words. "They're buying their witnesses." Rachel read it twice. She didn't know who sent it, but she didn't doubt it for a second. The next morning, something strange happened. A local news anchor, one known for never ruffling feathers, ran a short story during the breakfast hour. It was about the gala, about how a certain billionaire's name had come up in confidential military procurement circles. No accusations, no direct quotes, just questions. It lasted less than 2 minutes. But in the courtroom, everyone had seen it. Langston's eyes were darker that morning. He kept glancing over his shoulder, whispering things to his attorney. The judge looked more tense than usual, his fingers twitching every time the court reporter coughed or a juror turned their head. Then Aaliyah struck again. It was subtle. Just one sentence during cross-examination of another witness who claimed she looked angry in the parking lot that night. She didn't challenge the story. She simply asked, "Were you paid to be here?" The man laughed. "No, of course not." But something in his eyes broke when she asked it, and the jury saw it. It was like someone had flipped a switch. They started leaning in more, whispering to each other, taking notes again, watching the prosecution, not like students, but like detectives. The power had shifted. It wasn't in the judge's gavel. It wasn't in Langston's money. It wasn't even in Rachel's arguments. It was in silence. In the way Darius didn't flinch when they attacked him. In the way Aaliyah stayed still when lies were thrown like daggers. In the way truth doesn't shout, it waits, and when it finally speaks, the whole room leans forward to hear it. The morning started like any other. Coffee, courthouse security, metal detectors, reporters setting up outside, brushing the cold off their shoulders. Inside, Judge Calloway sat straighter than usual, trying a little too hard to look calm. Langston, too. His tie was tighter, his suit even more expensive than yesterday. But his eyes kept darting toward the back of the courtroom, like he was expecting someone who hadn't shown up yet. And then there were Darius and Aaliyah, walking in slowly, hands unclenched, eyes clear. Not nervous, not arrogant, just ready. They didn't look like people on trial. They looked like people with a mission. When the judge banged his gavel, the courtroom settled. The prosecution stood. "Your Honor," the young DA said, "we have financial records from the Blackwoods' personal bank accounts. They show large, unexplained deposits in the days before the alleged attack. We believe this proves intent." A smug grin slid across Langston's face. The jury turned to look at Darius and Aaliyah, but they weren't surprised. Rachel stood slowly, calm. "Your Honor," she said, "we've reviewed those records as well. Those deposits are retirement benefits, standard for military personnel leaving active duty. Here are the statements confirming it." She handed over a folder. Judge Calloway didn't even open it. "Denied. This line of argument will proceed." Rachel didn't flinch. She'd expected that. Aaliyah leaned forward and whispered something to her. Rachel nodded. "One more thing, Your Honor," she said, standing again. "We'd like to introduce a sealed document. It's from the Department of Defense, confirming Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood's unit assignments and clearances." Judge Calloway's jaw tightened. "That's classified. I won't allow it." "It's redacted," Rachel replied. "But it proves one thing, that both defendants were cleared for special operations overseas." Langston shifted in his seat. "No," the judge said flatly. "That has no bearing on this case." But it did, because now the jury knew. This wasn't just a couple who'd served. This was something deeper, and that changed everything. Later, during a recess, a young court staffer handed Rachel a folded sticky note. No signature, no context. Just 4 words, scratched in tight handwriting. "Check the clerk's log." Rachel didn't hesitate. She headed straight to the records office. Inside the logbook, she saw something strange. At 2:47 a.m. that morning, someone had accessed the evidence room using a key card. The name? The lead prosecutor. Back in court, Rachel stood again, this time with a quiet fire in her eyes. "Your Honor," she said, holding the logbook high, "we have a serious issue. According to courthouse records, someone entered the evidence room in the middle of the night, and we believe files were removed." The courtroom gasped. Langston froze. The DA tried to speak, but the judge slammed his gavel. "This is outrageous," he said. "This courtroom won't tolerate conspiracy theories." Aaliyah stood, not loud, not angry, just clear. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this courtroom has tolerated much worse already." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. Even the court reporter stopped typing, because the tide had turned. The people in that room weren't looking at the defendants like criminals anymore. They were looking at them like truth tellers. Langston leaned over to whisper to the judge, but Calloway didn't meet his eyes. He was sweating again. Darius finally spoke, only his second time during the entire trial. "You've tried to hide what we know," he said evenly. "You've blocked witnesses, erased evidence, and ignored the law. But we knew you would." He turned to the jury, and we were ready for it. Rachel reached into her case file and pulled out a folder. It wasn't just documents, it was photos, screenshots of late-night meetings, surveillance images of money changing hands, transaction receipts from Langston's shell companies, a web, every string connected, every line traced. The judge was red now, his breathing uneven. "This is inadmissible," he started, but it was too late. A knock came at the courtroom door. A man entered in a plain dark suit, flashed a badge, FBI. No words, just a nod. Calloway went pale. Aaliyah didn't move. She simply said, "The system isn't broken, it's infected," and the antidote had just arrived. The moment the FBI agent entered the room, something changed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Just the sight of that badge made the back row straighten up, made the reporters click their pens faster, made Langston's lawyer break into a sudden sweat, Judge Calloway tried to pretend nothing had happened. He cleared his throat and forced out a sentence. "Let's continue." But his voice was thinner now, no weight behind it. Langston leaned close, whispering fast, but the judge didn't look at him. He was staring at the file in front of him, but it wasn't the evidence he was seeing. It was the corner he'd painted himself into. The prosecution tried to move forward, called their next witness. A man in a tight black blazer took the stand. Claimed to be a parking garage employee who saw Darius tinkering with Langston's car the night of the gala. It was a lie. Everyone in the room knew it. Rachel Vance stood for cross-examination. "Can you tell the court which direction Mr. Blackwood approached from the left?" Rachel tilted her head. "So you saw his face?" The man nodded. Rachel turned toward the jury. "Can you describe any facial features?" A pause. "Strong jawline? And what color tie was he wearing?" More silence. "I can't recall." Rachel stepped closer, voice calm. "Were you ever paid for your testimony?" "No." She nodded. "Strange, because 2 nights ago, a payment of $5,000 was deposited into your account from a company called North Pine Consulting, which just so happens to be a shell company tied to Langston's firm. Would you like to try again?" The man froze. His eyes darted to Langston, then the judge. Then he folded. "I didn't want to do it," he whispered. "They said it would be easy, that the jury wouldn't believe them anyway." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jury looked at each other. Really looked, for the first time all day. Even Judge Calloway couldn't mask the panic anymore. "Enough," he barked, slamming his gavel. "This line of questioning is closed." But it was already too late. The lie was out. The wall had cracked. One by one, the prosecution's case started to fall apart. Witnesses changed their stories. Depositions didn't match transcripts. Bank statements revealed quiet transfers, timed perfectly with testimony dates. Langston's polished confidence began to unravel. He tugged at his collar, whispered something to his attorney, tried to smile, but it didn't land. Because the courtroom wasn't with him anymore. It wasn't neutral either. It was shifting toward the truth. During a break, the courthouse buzzed. Reporters checked emails. Phones dinged with headlines. Whistleblower claims bribery behind witness list. Courtroom meltdown, prosecution unraveling in Langston trial. Sources, judge under federal investigation. Calloway read them on his phone, face blank. In the hallway, Aaliyah stood by the water fountain, quiet. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't celebrating. She was watching. She could feel the building shake, not physically, but in trust, in silence, in power. Inside the judge's chambers, a conversation was happening no one was supposed to hear, but the Blackwoods were always listening. Langston leaned over Calloway's desk. "You shut this down, or we both burn." Calloway's voice cracked. "They've got everything. Witnesses, paper trails, photos." "Then you find a way," Langston snapped. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that every word was being picked up by a small microphone taped beneath the desk. Planted days earlier, by someone who looked like just another maintenance worker. And that feed? It was being recorded, saved, copied, sent. That evening, while Langston tried to regroup and the judge tried to sleep, a storm was building. Federal agents, reporters, congressional aides, people in the Pentagon, quiet voices who had watched powerful men hide behind expensive suits and were ready for a change. And Darius and Aaliyah? They sat at home. No TV on, no wine, just quiet. "We're close," Aaliyah said, flipping through a manila folder filled with names, dates, documents. Darius nodded. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she echoed. "We end it." The courthouse felt different that morning. The crowd outside had doubled. News vans lined the block. Reporters whispered into microphones. And inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Not just journalists, not just lawyers, military officials, civil rights leaders, even federal agents sitting quietly in the back row. People weren't just watching a trial anymore. They were watching a reckoning. Darius and Aaliyah entered the courtroom like they had every day, calm, collected, eyes forward. They didn't nod, didn't wave. They didn't need to, because everyone already knew whose side they were on now. Judge Calloway looked worse than ever. His robe was still ironed, his bench still high, but his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. And when he called, "The court to order," there was no weight in his voice. "The court will hear final statements," he announced. Langston's lawyer stood up first. He tried to sound confident. "My client has served this community for decades. He's donated to veterans, helped build schools, and now he's being accused based on speculation and conspiracy." He went on for 8 minutes. 8 long minutes filled with the same lines. The same spin, and no one was buying it. Then Rachel Vance stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even walk to the center of the room. She simply turned to the jury. "You've seen the evidence," she said. "You've heard the lies. But you've also seen something else, something that can't be faked." She turned to Darius and Aaliyah. "Strength, calm, purpose, not arrogance, not defiance, just truth." Then she placed a single photo on the projector screen, a shot taken in secret. Langston handing over a manila envelope to a court clerk in a dark alley 2 days before trial began. The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward. "Objection," Langston's lawyer snapped. "Overruled," Calloway said without even thinking. Because he couldn't protect it anymore. The lie was too big now. That's when Aaliyah stood. She hadn't spoken in days. The courtroom hushed immediately. "I have one question," she said softly. "For the court and for the people watching." She turned and looked directly at Judge Calloway. How many others never got their chance to speak? He said nothing. How many veterans, she continued, how many innocent people sat in this courtroom and watched truth get buried, just because they didn't have money or power? Still, the judge didn't speak, but his eyes dropped because the answer was too many. She stepped back, and then Darius stood, not to defend himself, not to point fingers, just to finish what they started. "We were trained to fight in silence," he said, "to dismantle threats without drawing attention. But sometimes the mission changes. Sometimes the enemy isn't holding a weapon. Sometimes the enemy is wearing a robe or a suit or sitting behind a desk." He looked around the room, at every juror, every camera. This wasn't just about us. It was about a system that thinks it can't be challenged. He nodded once. And now it has been. Silence followed. Not weak silence. Powerful silence. The kind that says, something just changed. The jury left to deliberate. It took them less than an hour. When they returned, the foreperson stood tall. "On all counts, we find the defendants not guilty." The room exploded. Reporters dashed out. Cameras flashed, but the Blackwoods didn't cheer. They stood, steady, as if they already knew how it would end. Judge Calloway tried to dismiss court, but before he could reach for the gavel, someone entered. The courtroom. 2 federal agents. They approached the bench. "We have a warrant," one said simply, "for the arrest of Judge Raymond Calloway." Gasps. Gasps from everyone. Calloway's mouth opened, but no words came out. The agent gently took the gavel from his hand, then turned to Langston. "And Mr. Gregory Langston, you'll need to come with us as well." Langston laughed, a short, breathless laugh. "You have no idea who I am?" "No," the agent said, "but they do." He pointed to Darius and Aaliyah, and the whole room followed his hand. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds. People, stood on the courthouse steps, some in uniform, some in suits, some just watching something they didn't think could happen, watching the system face consequences. Darius and Aaliyah walked out, hand in hand. No fanfare. No press conference, just a quiet walk back to their car. "I think we started something," Aaliyah said. Darius smiled slightly. "We finished something, too." In the weeks that followed, arrests were made across the country. Judges, officials, businessmen, all connected, all exposed. The evidence Aaliyah had carefully gathered over months was already with investigators. It had never just been about clearing their names. It had always been about cleaning house, one file at a time, one courtroom at a time, one lie at a time. And as the headlines spread and the system shifted, one truth echoed across the country. They accused the wrong couple, because justice doesn't always come in a robe. Sometimes it comes in quiet steps, and trained eyes, and the stillness of two people who never needed to raise their voices because they had the truth on their side.